Okay. Good morning, everybody. And I'm Kent Rogers. And I'm grateful to be here. And I've never been to Maine before, so that's nice. And I definitely noticed a cultural difference. So where I come from, if you say, hi, my name is so and so, you imagine or expect the other person to say, oh, I am so and so. But like the first 3 or 4 people I met, they were like, nice to meet you. And so if I say my name is such and such, it means what's your name?
It's an invitation.
So today's topic is empathy as a door to spiritual community. And empathy, in my opinion, is one of the foundational qualities of human beings. The famous Roger Ebert said, empathy is the most essential quality of human society. And I could agree with that. So let's take a look what it means. According to Merriam-Webster, the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another, of either the past, present, or present without having the feelings, thoughts, and experience fully communicated in an objective, explicit manner. So this is a communication, basically, but it transcends our normal mode of speaking to one another about what's going on. And although it's not mentioned here, I like to think of empathy as having 3 levels. One is intellectual empathy, where you can see rationally where that other person is coming from. And I would say that's the most surface level. And then there's emotional empathy, where you resonate like a string that's played on the guitar. If there's another guitar nearby, that same string will start to vibrate. So there's sort of an emotional empathy, where we feel what another is feeling. And then the deepest of all is spiritual empathy, which is we profoundly experience what it's like to be that person. And it always results in that we are in the recollection that this is a child of God, loved by God. And that's a very beautiful experience, which I'm sure everyone here has experienced at some point. So also the famous Meryl Streep said, the great gift of human beings is that we have the power of empathy. And it is true that while animals seem to be able to care for one another, the depth of empathy that a human being is given to experience may be absent. And it fits right into the central doctrine of our new church, which is love. The Lord is love, all of life is love, and our goal as human beings is to love. So truly the essence of all love is to be found in union, in the life of love that we call joy. Delight, pleasure, sweetness, blessedness, contentment, and happiness. The essence of love is that what is ours should belong to someone else. Feeling the joy of someone else as joy within ourselves, that is loving. And that is empathy. That is a wonderful definition of empathy. And it goes on to say that feeling our joy in someone else, that's not what love is about. So it's interesting that in relation to the second to last sentence where it says, the essence of love is that we give what is of ourselves, it's not talking about saying, oh, I had this great day and how come they're not rejoicing with me that I won the race or something like that. We are giving of ourselves about what we can to bless someone. So empathy offers us spiritual superpowers, quite literally actually. So for one thing, when you start to feel what others are feeling and you understand the pain that they go through, you cannot but help be motivated to help them. So you gain the superpower of action. And we know that all good that we do is always actually God's doing. So you are becoming a vessel of God's love to take power as Gard talked about, bringing it down into the natural world where we are alive for the sake of love. It gives us insight and wisdom. When you start to really know deeply what it's like to be another person, I would say that's where wisdom begins. And with that wisdom and love, you start to have the ability to heal others and yourself. You know what they're going through, you can hear them, and you can respond to them in a way that they realize, I've been heard and I am loved. And that's very healing. In fact, Carl Rogers, the great psychotherapist of the 50s and 60s, who introduced an entire new way of counseling, said basically empathy, listening with undivided attention and empathy is what heals people. And all other forms of psychotherapy since then have adopted this notion. And they've done studies that have shown that really the thing that, regardless of the orientation, whether it's psychodynamic or behavioral or cognitive, what really heals people, what predicts the best outcome, is whether the person feels connected with their therapist. It dissolves hate. You can't hate when you are knowing what it's like to be that person. And when you communicate that you know that, it's hard for them to hate you. Ability to travel spiritual distances. So this is kind of why I said superpowers, but we know that our state of mind is literally a place in the spiritual world. And if you are able to relate to people, then you can quickly move from one society of the universal human, this place that we are, and go to where another person is to offer aid. And it's clear to see that what empathy really does is it causes you to be a part of the bloodstream, because that's the part of our body that goes quickly from here to there to offer aid, to offer love and nutrients. So you really get to know the entire human, spiritual human, the universal human of which we each are a part. And it's interesting because this requires a kind of selfless love, and the red blood cells are literally selfless. They have their nucleus has been removed that they might carry oxygen. So I just love seeing those little connections. Cool. You start to see the Lord in others, because as you see what it is to be human, you see that the Lord is present in all. And so, again, love in the human race is amplified. This is the revolution of consciousness that will save us. And it's pretty amazing. This is an anonymous quote, but if we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't remain. So it releases people from the shackles of shame and fear, and you can start to be a healer for this world. So without empathy, this is kind of what we experience society is like. We're all independent, individual blobs, and often it seems like we're, getting in each other's way. Get out of my way, both in the car, but also in our lives. But as we grow in empathy, we start to realize that we're all one organism. And we retain the ability to know that we are an individual. Part of what's scary about empathy is we feel like, oh, what's going to happen to me? But as the Third Testament says, the more we enter into the Lord's love, a state of love, the more we feel alive as an individual, though we know we are part of the whole. And that is a superpower. So here's a little experiment in empathy. Here's two great quotes I found. The highest form of knowledge is empathy. And then learning to stand in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes, that's how peace begins. And it's up to you to make that happen. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world. So I agree with Gard again. We can't solve the problems of this earth with a political solution. It has to come from within. Okay, so these are the two people that said each of these quotes. And this, I think you all know him. This man is named Bill I don't want to get his name wrong. Yeah, Bullard. Bill Bullard. He is a Republican strategist for a lobby group, and he served in the houses. Now, I'm not going to say which to avoid political controversy, but when I found out who said one of those quotes, I thought, how can this be true? How can, I don't believe that this statement could come from such a person. And I was almost ready to throw it out and not include it. And then I thought, wait, I'm lacking empathy right here. So I had to think, all right, what do I have to do to gain empathy for this individual? So that led to this part of steps of removing barriers to empathy. The first is to say, I don't know. I honestly can't judge this person because I don't know where he's coming from. And it's something to strive for. What the highest angels we read are able to do is admit and understand that they really basically know nothing. That compared to what they don't know, what they do know is nothing. And then the other thing, let me go back, is that what looks to us in life like a heap of meaningless rubble is part of the building plans and materials for the Lord's, who's creating a wonderful abode for the human race. So these ideas help me to let go of my knowledge by which I'm trying to judge another human. And then the next thing is I have to, as the angels do, as that quote says, is assume the good, that this person is trying to do us right. That this person has a motive of good, whether I can see it or not. Or at the very least, if I see, like the angels do again in that quote, excuse what I see as being born in ignorance. That it's not that they're actively malicious and the devil, him or herself, but that due to a lack of either affection in their lives or access to spiritual truth, they aren't able to move forward. And then I had to recognize risks. There are indeed risks in choosing to empathize. It's a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice. This is a PhD, by the way, in social work, and she's written many 5 New York Times bestsellers on topics of basically healing the human race. In order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. So if your friend or your spouse or child is in deep pain, or even an enemy, it's hard to say, okay, I'm going to go feel that pain too. So we might feel the grief that another is feeling, or we might feel grief because we have to enter into the close realization that this person is in a state of mind that is sad. Let's say we have a loved one who is violent against somebody. It's hard to get close to that person in empathy because we will grieve the state that they are in, even if they themselves are not grieving. And the other one is we may feel like if we empathize with that person, then we are going to be culpable, or we are going to condone. Don't read number 3. I skipped ahead by accident. But we are going to condone the behavior that is immoral. But that's not true. We can empathize with someone and still say, I'm not going to be the kind of person that locks children in cages. Now this one, number 3, may feel culpability and guilt. What that one really is about is, I'll show you the next quote, and I have to admit I felt a bit of guilt here. Empathy is when a person accurately communicates that they see another's intentions and emotional state. It means watching our child's frustration and focusing on how life feels in that little child's body, while putting our own anger and agenda into the background. So, if our child is very upset and we enter into their experience, what happens is we feel guilt, at least I do, because I know that I'm part of the reason they're feeling so upset. So that's another barrier and the more barriers I can recognize, the better I am able to move through them. So it's important to look at these. Fear. Empathy changes us. It dissolves our ego, basically. And the ego does not like that. The self chooses to do everything it can to preserve itself. Empathy does the opposite. It dissolves our borders. We therefore lose control. We lose control of what our motivation is going to be as we move into empathy, because the Lord's love will start to motivate us. And that's scary for the ego. We want to be in charge of our own agenda. Mm-hmm. And then this last one I already talked about, the fear of condoning. And of course, it's going to make us have to take action. When we start to feel at heart what the pain of another, how can we still do nothing? Well, we can't. If we really empathize, we can't do nothing. The Lord's love will force us into action. And that action may be to do something that we don't feel up to, or that we don't feel safe doing. So those are some of the risks. And it may make us have to feel love for someone that we have chosen to carry a resentment against, be it a public figure or a loved one. Now, what I really get excited about is the Lord's empathy. I've been in a discussion with a mentor of mine about how the timeless, eternal, outside of time and space God can't really experience human emotions because they're based in time and space, but I have to say I completely disagree. Our Lord is love itself. Therefore, he empties himself completely of his own being into the experience of his beloved, which is all of us. And in so doing, he literally knows every single state we experience, and it is he that is enduring the pain. Such a powerful idea of God for me. So therefore, when we look at each other, we're looking at God, and we also know that God is with us and in us and for us. And this causes us to enter into a oneness, which the Lord, last prayer he had, was that we may all be one in him with one another. And empathy is the door to that one door. And to love the Lord is to access empathy. And that is his new commandment. The last commandment he gave us was love one another as I have loved you. And I would say all of the writings are basically supporting that one idea. That's the core of our religion. And if we can't empathize in turn with the Lord, we can't really obey that. And if we don't believe that the Lord really endures pain because he loves us, then we still can't obey that. So we think of this as the shortest verse in the Word, but I found this interesting title of an essay by Andre Resner that says the longest verse. And because of the implications, I agree it's the longest. Now, truth is, empathy is not something we really talk about as much as we do. I can talk about empathy, but that's not empathy. Empathy is something we do. And there's application to our relationships. If we enter into empathy, it alters our relationships. But what I have found is that it also really altered the way I read or receive information from the Word when I forced myself to empathize with the characters. You know, when I was younger, would read the Word, it was, okay, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, we're meant to be like these guys. With time, I started to realize that I'm not very good at being the good guys. And so the Lord caused me to have empathy with the bad guys. And what I found was that there's a great deal of a wealth of loving information from the Lord, if I can relate to the Philistines, for example. That is part of the Lord's word. He loved all the characters, and I am obliged to learn how to love them. So I had the intention of going into 2 meditations because meditation really is a wonderful way to access empathy. It's been proven that meditating increases empathy by psychological experiment. And I think part of what it does is it greatly reduces your sense of self for a while. And that opens you up to your sense of connection with others. And that causes us to have oneness. And oneness causes us to have this word kenosis, which means the emptying out of self and receiving of the Lord. So this book, this was the first book I wrote, and it was based in experiments in empathizing with characters whom the Lord healed. I would meditate on what it was like to be that character. And what I found is what was happening on the literal level of healing of blindness or healing of leprosy, the same disease but on a spiritual level was healable through that very story. It was miraculous in a way. So I called it 12 Miracles of Spiritual Growth. I was going to lead you into a meditation which is easy for you to do on your own. I'm sorry I don't have time to do that one too. But basically, if you're having trouble with someone, you still yourself in some kind of induction into meditation. Get as deeply still as possible. And then project yourself into that person. What is it like to be this person? And if you can break through all those barriers, you will find that it invariably brings us closer to the one that we're having difficulty with, be it loved one, or neighbor, or leader of some variety. I am going to lead you in this. So we all know the story where Jesus called a woman, or implied, a little dog. This always bothered me. How can the Lord of love call someone a little dog? So that was the first, I decided I gotta know. So I meditated on it. And the result was beautiful. So I'm just gonna lead you into a meditation. What I want you to do after is put yourself into this woman's shoes and see what happens from this story. I hope that the same thing or something similarly wonderful happens for you. Just remember, she's a woman, so she's already a second-class citizen, more or less a servant to the men. She's not an Israelite, so she's now a third-class citizen. Her daughter is demon-possessed, so she must have done something wrong. So now she's a fourth or fifth-class citizen. She's more or less doomed. That's where you're beginning. So I invite you to close your eyes and take in a very deep breath and hold it, imagining that this breath as the Lord's love in the form of a liquid golden light filling your chest. And as you breathe out, slowly that light extends through your body, down through your hips and legs, filling your feet, through your arms, filling your hands. And I ask you to continue to breathe like this for the next few silent moments. With each breath, it fills your lungs, and then as you exhale, it fills the rest of your body with deep peace, the warmth of the Lord's love and life. Now imagine yourself in a dusty town in Galilee. You are desperate. Your deep love for your daughter will drive you to do anything to obtain healing for her. And you have heard that there is a man of the Jews who has great powers. And you know that you will do anything to access this man for your great love for your daughter. And once you have put yourself into her place, understanding how you're feeling as a fifth-class citizen, but with an enduring love for your daughter, put yourself into her shoes as I read the story. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, my daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, again, put yourself, imagine it vividly that you are here kneeling before him. "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. Amen. And as you're ready, slowly bring your mind back to your body and this room. And you can open your eyes as you are ready. Whether you are meditating still or not, imagine the tremendous joy that this woman must have been flooded. The greatest joy of her life, no doubt. And then ask you to think in contrast. Oh, let me not go there yet. I wish I had had time to extend the meditation in a proper length of time, but due to the given amount of time, I did it briefly. But you can do this with any story of the Word, and it actually offers a very profound insight into what the Lord is communicating. There's one place where it says, this is again in the writings, the Third Testament, where we read, and I wish I had the specific quote, but true insight into the spiritual meaning is purely of affection and emotion. So we can analyze it intellectually and get access to it as if through a window. But when we empathize into the Word, I feel like it's a door. We open into the door. As hopefully you were able to step right into this story. Did anyone gain an insight into why the Lord would have said this, how this was a loving statement, or was anyone able to experienced something that they would care to share. Yes.
I felt like she was really putting herself at risk, because being in the class and the gender that she was, that her love for her daughter meant that this was like, she could be killed by them or stoned or injured, but that's why she spoke up, because she had nothing to lose.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Ross.
Oh, insight I got, which I've never had. I've always felt angry at Jesus in, in the story, but a joy that she felt or could have felt about being able to be used in this way. Like, I've been through all this, and you are using me to teach or show something wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. Yes. Kevin?
It just struck me as maybe, a lot of times things are lost in translation, and maybe we don't have exactly the wording right of what he meant, but it seemed more like he was giving her an opportunity to say, like, I'm a human like everybody else, and that, this. So maybe the words that we have aren't exactly what he said, but it seemed clear that he was just saying to her, like, tell me why I should help you. And she said, because I'm like anybody else. I'm a person too, and we're all the same. And that's what I got out of it. Like, even though she was cast aside by, all her peers and everybody in society, she was still just a person like everybody else.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kenneth. And I'll actually talk about that later. Yes.
David Keating. Actually, I've thought of this before, but I thought a good time to share it anyway. That one thing I agree with Ken with a lot of the hard passages I look for, is it the right, was it passed down correctly, or the right translation? But in that situation, a person's tone of voice can say whether something's sarcastic or where their spirit is. We can't get the tone of voice she used. We don't know her spiritual state. Perhaps Jesus said that because she needed to fully be humble. And maybe she wasn't as humble as she needed to be, or she sounded, or there was something that we can't get from just the words or the translation that he needed to say to her. But that is a very hard saying. But I've been accused of this myself. I'm telling people something. I said, well, what's wrong with the words I said? I said, what's your tone of voice? It was sarcasm. It cut me. So that's one thing I wonder if he needed to say that to her so that she would see even the dogs eat the crumbs from the table, and he would know that she was fully gotten rid of her ego and her programming, and she was ready for her child to be healed. I could be making an excuse, but that's one thing that I thought could be what happened.
No, that's very interesting, David. I had not ever thought about that, but thank you for sharing that. You.
Yeah, along with what Dave was saying, Jesus frequently had others phrase a question or a situation in such a way that the teaching actually came out from the voice of others.
Yeah.
So she was acknowledging a humility that allowed him then to do the miracle. But he was teaching, she was the voice for what he was trying to get across.
Thank you, Hugh. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Denise.
Denise Cowley. It brings to mind the Good Samaritan story somehow to me, that as others have sort of echoed, that the teachings, the Lord spoke to us in parables, and without a parable he spoke to us not, I think is the quote. And so that has always troubled me on a certain level, and the only way I can rectify it is thinking of how things were in those days, and similar to the Good Samaritan the Samaritans were known as dogs, basically, or the untouchables, or they were other, and the Good Samaritan is the person in the story who is the hero, so to speak, and the heroes, so to speak, walk on the other side, and the people we think of as the good guys. So it, as the Lord does in several instances, it tosses things up in the air, and we have to come to a new place within ourselves about how we judge things.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So let me circle back to what Kenneth was saying. What really got me in meditating on this story the first time, first, was the depth of this woman's love, that nothing was going to turn her away. Whether she was ignored, which was the first thing we heard, whether the disciples shooed her away like a little dog, or even the Lord himself said, implied, you're a little dog. Didn't matter to her. She was going to get her daughter healed, or at least try. And she succeeded. So what I realized was that only in putting up barrier after barrier to this woman was the Lord able to allow her, from her own actions, realize that she has power and that she is valuable in that she has that power. She was powerless to society, but to God himself, she was powerful. And the truth is, she knew what is true of all of us. We are, of ourselves, nothing but little dogs, or worse. And that's a great truth that she had, and she was willing to say and feel. But in that humility, God is able to lift us up. On contrast, if the Lord had just said, oh, I feel so bad for you, and here, I'm going to heal your daughter right away, it would have been a tremendously different experience. She would have been very happy for her daughter's healing, but she would not have experienced the liberation from the demon that had plagued many of us of feeling like a little dog, totally worthless. There's a difference between being humble and knowing the self as, impossibly depraved without the Lord's healing us, and knowing and thinking that we're worthless. Even being entering into the worthlessness of our selfhood outside of the context of the Lord's love doesn't mean that as an individual God created that we're worthless. We are worth something. And the Lord, by putting up these barriers, showed her worth. Not from his mouth, oh, I really think you're valuable, you're great. That doesn't really penetrate. But to force her to get through these barriers, that penetrated. And she walked away from there, in my opinion, realizing that the stigma that all of society put upon her was meaningless. She was a woman, but the Lord gave her her power. She was a Canaanite, but the Lord gave her her power. And she had a demon-possessed daughter, but the Lord said, you are powerful. So I titled that chapter, Healing from the Demon of Worthlessness. And I think that that's the inner meaning. The demon that was plaguing her daughter was this feeling of worthlessness, which many people experience. And if we meditate through this very story, putting ourselves as deeply as possible into her shoes, we also receive that healing. We allow ourselves to feel worthless, or enter into that part of us which relates to hers, and as the Lord healed the physical daughter, so we are healed of that same demon on our spiritual level. So that's, again, something wonderful about reading the word with empathy. It really reaches in and heals us. We have 5 more minutes. Does anyone have anything they want to say or comment on?
I'll have a comment that I was wondering to say for the discussion. But as I look at it, empathy is the result of love. Love is not the result of empathy. You come into empathy through love, and for some people, empathy is easy. And for some people, being intellectual is easy. But to do what doesn't come easy requires effort, and effort requires love or a motivation. You have to want to do it. It says amplification, these were, as you put, result of empathy, amplification of seeing the Lord in others. As I see it, that comes out of love. And when you have love and it amplifies seeing the Lord in others, then you come into the empathy. As, like amplification of love in general is a result of love. And love results in having empathy. Without love, empathy can be an act, but it isn't sincere. And some people can be really appear empathetic, but inside there isn't empathy. It's an act because it benefits themselves. So that's how I see empathy. Genuine empathy will be the result of love, and that takes effort.
I hear at least 2 things in what you said. One is the behavior or emulation of empathy isn't always empathy, and I would agree with that. True empathy, on the other hand, can't be emulated. It is what it is. I mean, like, true empathy is a form of love. It's not an emulation. And I would say it's a practice of love. I agree with that. However, it's a practice that we can choose. I agree that it comes naturally to some people and not others, and that's nothing having to do with a spiritual statement.
Right.
It's just a fact. But anyone can choose to do it. And choosing to do it is an act of love, and we know that love arises only by choosing to act. That we often will not feel like doing something, but by choosing, that's how love is amplified. So I see love and empathy empathy as a face of love. And just as all the other acts of love that we must do, so is empathy. I saw a hand back there.
Well, I was going, this is Martha for those people on Facebook. I was thinking it's almost like a circle. It's not, I think that empathy, you have to have some love to do empathy, but I also think that empathy brings out more love. I think that by having empathy for others, it brings out more love. So I think it's not just, you don't have to have the love and then you get empathy. I think it's like a circle goes around or a stepping stone.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Martha.
Another brief comment. This is Hugh Odner. I'm so shy and humble that I forget to introduce myself, but also so forgetful. It reminds me of the song Magic Penny. Love is something, if you give it away, you get more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, empathy brings spiritual community, topic of this week, because it allows us to see beyond the surface, time and space selves, which are not connected, to our true self, which is connected with all other people and nature. We can empathize even with nature, and that will help us. Thank you.